Here we are. Welcome to the sixth episode. And I'm recording this episode with such a full heart, full of gratitude for you to be here. We've just launched this Hustle Hard podcast just last week, around 10 days ago. So this is episode six, and this is your reminder slash your cue, something that I drastically had to learn to surrender, to have patience, because I've been working on, this podcast since October together with Cynthia, my podcast manager. Like, if you've listened to episode one, you met her. It's like, she's amazing. I could not have done this without her. And we started in October, and October feels like a lifetime ago. This version of me that came in with such a hurry, like impatient, and in my mind, I would have a full business, my podcast, everything up and running in December that year. Here we are, June 2024, and we have just launched. And in and itself, I love the quote, let go and let God. And that's what we had to do because we both personally were moving through some serious stuff. If you listened to episode 5, you've heard my stuff, and I'm going to share a lot about that in this coming episode, because in this episode I want to talk about people pleasing and, like, what it really takes to start putting yourself first and be your own number one, like really true empowerment, like embodiment. But before I get to that, there is this invitation to slow down. Sometimes, because sometimes we need to integrate the lessons. Because I shared this before, life is between you and you. So my life is between me and me first and foremost, before I include anyone outside of myself, before I include you. And sometimes when you go through the motions, you need to integrate it, let it sink in. And I've been moving through and just hitting so many walls in terms of being confronted with myself. And now that everything is sort of coming together this June, where we just launched, I feel anew, and that's always easy to say when you come out the other side and, not fully there yet. But looking back in October and the woman that sat before me, my mirror, it's just so funny that in a few short months, things can feel so different. And that's also the power of energy, right? Because with opening up this space, this vortex, this intention, like, I truly believe our business, each and one of your services or products, have their own soul. Just like the Hustle Hard podcast. Like, it's been moving through me and Cynthia over the last couple of months and weeks, setting the intention. And with the intention of the Hustle Hard podcast and what it's here to do, having its own agenda, clearly there were layers to transcend, like a snake, layers to let go of. Because when we move to our authentic selves, in our core, like, the invitation is to let go of those pieces of us that were not ours in the first place. And without us even realizing it, whether through society, friends, school, our upbringing, traumas, our big life events like heartbreaks, they mold us. And then can we keep an open heart? And when our hearts have been closed, through live events, and this is what I shared in my last podcast, that I was heartbroken. But instead of heartbroken, I felt like my heart was broken open, broken open into 1,000 pieces. So that masculine energy that I was moving through, and, I'm going to share way more about that. So what I want to say, is just more that my head is frustrated. This is the heart head conversation. And I just want to be open about that, because we all have those conversations, right? Like, how has it taken you all these months to launch this podcast? How have you started in October and only launched in June? That's what, 8 months. My head is frustrated. My ego is frustrated, because it's that part of me that's still in a hurry. But what are we hurrying for? If you take a little moment, like, what are we hurrying for? And this is a renewed part of myself, and mainly through psychic school, that I've been moving through. It's done now, 7 months, most intense months. And I'm sure we're going to touch on that in this episode as well. But I suddenly have this renewed energy of there's no one I need to prove my worth for. And my whole life, I've been moving in needing to prove myself. And that urge and that drive to be successful, because I needed to prove myself, like, look, I'm worthy because I'm making this money off, I'm having that status, and I'm having those achievements. And therefore, you are impatient and you are in a hurry. But if you ditch all of that, when you trust life, you trust yourself, you trust that you move in your inspiration and you're moving through the lessons. And your setbacks are not setbacks, but they are set-ups. They are the events, the whatever it is that you're moving through in order to set you up for even more greatness. That sometimes before we get there, quote unquote, there is work to do, our skin to be shattered. So, with that, just a little moment of celebrating that it's life. And I'm so excited now, and that also now I'm excited to start recording every week, like to really get an episode out every week, because honestly, this is now June. The last episode was recorded in March, just before I went to Bali. And what I wanted to touch on today, among a lot of other things, is this quote that found me a couple of months back. And that is like, you're not healing, because healing now, it's such a sort of a buzzword, right? We're all healing. Like, yes, great. I am applauding you, but why? Like, why are we healing? Because healing in itself, it is something to be celebrated, but it's not a goal on in itself, right? So this quote was, you're not healing to be able to handle trauma. And I'm adding in because we know trauma. So you're not healing to deal with trauma. You are healing to be able to handle joy. You are healing to be able to handle more joy. And I'm leaving a little silence, because joy, pleasure, magic, that's the real stuff. To be able to handle more of that. And in Bali as well, I started to have this little pleasure experiment. And in order to receive pleasure, we need to be present, fully present. So, not in our head, thinking of all the things that we should do, need to do, have to be doing, during sex, where we think about work or tasks or lists. Like, how oftentimes are we distracted? And I had this moment where I was sitting at the sunrise, 5 o'clock. And apparently sunrise wasn't until 5:40, and I was sitting there, almost watching the time tick from my phone, because I have stuff to do. I wanted to go out on this sunrise walk. And I just felt so restless in that moment. But when you feel so restless and you look at your phone and you're counting down the times, or the time, like literally you are distracted, and with that you miss that feeling of being in awe. You miss being present. You're not there. So if you've listened to the last episode, you've heard, and if you haven't listened, go back, that I've been moving through some serious shit. And two things that I've been doing over the last couple of weeks, if not months. Like, what is left of my life if I take away my business? And what is left of my life if I take away my relationship? And the hard truth to face was not a lot. So, taking that back to, you are healing to be able to handle joy, not a lot of joy. Because my business was my joy, but also the space where I put the most pressure on myself because I needed to perform, because I needed to be better, because I needed to learn and I needed to develop and I needed more than anything to be successful. So then, how much of that is joy? And this is one of the biggest mistakes that we make. If I have a certain amount of success, then I'll be happy. Then I will create more time. Then I will be able to have more joy because I need to work hard first. And I need to sacrifice. You get what you tolerate. That's been on my mind the last couple of weeks. Like this sentence over and over and over again. You get what you tolerate. That's manifestation there. Because you don't manifest what you think about, what your thoughts. You manifest who you are. And who you are is way more than your thoughts, because your thoughts, that's only 5%. Like 95% is subconscious behavior. So it's your expectation, it's your beliefs, your habits, your routines, like all the things, like who you are being. It's your identity. So look at your life right now. What are you tolerating? If your business feels heavy, what are you tolerating there? If you have certain clients that feel dreading, what are you tolerating there? If you notice that you're people pleasing, put your clients first, put your family first, put your friends first, everyone first before you, what are you tolerating there? And this is sometimes hard to discover, because we're all human. And granted, we all make mistakes. And we also all have our blind spots. The things that we're not aware of. But once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So in the last episode, I shared that my partner cheated on me. And again, if you want to hear the full story, check in episode 5. And since that moment, I shared that I packed my stuff and we separated and I was going to Bali on my own. So here we are post Bali, March, this is June, 3 months after. And I'm going to share how our relationship turned out, by the end of sharing the stories. But I realized, a couple of weeks in, this actually hasn't been the first time I was cheated on. I've been cheated on before when I was 21, 20. My first big love in terms of a serious relationship. I had a love before. Puppy love. But before I share this story, there's something else that I wanted to share, what I've shared in the previous episode that was so important and so pivotal also for me to realize. Because I shared, as I've been moving through different kind of heartbreaks. My granddad and my grandmother, who are now in, let's call it, the elderly home. My granddad, who had a stroke, which was heartbreaking and still is. And in that moment, I felt overwhelmed. And when this situation with my partner happened, I felt so much power. And I explained that that's the feminine power of alchemize. Your feminine power to really use the pain and turn it into power and actually let your pain be your fuel. And I thought about it a lot because I am someone, despite the head-heart conversation, I'd love to understand the root of the soul is illogical. If you surrender to God's plan, to God's will, it's oftentimes illogical. Your higher self, your soul, universe, however you want to call it, you're called to do things that don't make sense to your mind. But still, our minds are the portal for growth and change. And our hearts are our magnet. That's how we magnetize and actually attract our manifestations, to bring them to life. That's our feeling. That's the frequency. That's the main thing. So when you are driving a car, instead of your head driving it, it's your heart that's in the first place, and then it's your head. But I love science, and I love when things can, to make it make sense, right? So going from that overwhelm and then that feeling empowered, even though I was going through so much heartbreak, this is my conclusion. The reason why I felt in my power is because I felt in control. Why did I feel in control? Because I was making what I call power moves. Because I was not sitting in a corner crying because I decided I'm going to pack my stuff. We're going to separate. I'm going on a trip to Bali on my own. I'm going to invite my dad there, who I haven't seen in years. Like we haven't been, he hasn't been part of my life or my adult life. But I was making all these decisions and what I call, like I said, power moves. And when we feel in control, and the opposite, when my grandmother and granddad and granddad had a stroke and they suddenly need to leave their houses, I felt overwhelmed because I felt powerless, because I felt like I was out of my control. But here's the thing, and the kicker: you are always in control. Maybe not the outside circumstances and the outside forces, because life will always throw us a curveball, no matter how much inner work we did, right? But through the inner work, what we do is we learn to navigate our own emotions and regulate our nervous system. What we do and what we always have control over is ourselves. And with ourselves is our being, the way we think, the way we act, the story we get to tell ourselves in that moment. And I pride myself now for my authenticity and for a long time my realness. And my realness, my rawness. But in that realness and rawness, we still get to decide the angle of the story we tell. And that's something that I missed or lacked to understand for the longest time. Because like a business failing, right? I had a failed business before. There are a lot of truths in that situation. I can say that I failed, that luck wasn't in my favor, that I tried it all, that I invested it all, that it just wasn't work out, that I worked hard. That's true. All is true. What I could also say is I created my business from the outside in, and that my heart wasn't in it. But through that business, I learned the lessons that it's not the kind of life that I wanted, because I refused to work 12 to 14 hours a day. Hell, make it 10, make it 8. But from that business, what I learned is if we don't own our shadows own us. So my perfectionism got the better of me. My high achiever, my need to do it all alone and to do it all by myself. And surely there's a way, I probably can't think of another 5, 4, 3, whatever the amount of stories that I can share this narrative. And what I mean to say is that we are in control of our own narrative. And together with that situation with Jordi, my partner, it's very easy to play the blame game and to blame it on outside forces, on things outside of ourselves. Partner, business, friends, parents, family. Everyone else is to blame except for us. And this is the hardest thing to do. Hard self-ownership. Taking radical responsibility for where we are in our life. Okay, my business failed. Okay, my relationship failed. How did I co-create this to be? Because the story that I wanted to say, and from power moves and from taking control and just realizing that we get to control the narrative and the thoughts that we think, is that I've been cheated on before. But one situation, this could be my story. Boo-hoo, people always cheat on me. I am not worthy of love. Could be one story, right? I'm not worthy. Everyone cheats. I am a failure. I'm not worthy of love. Da 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 da. But the fact that one instance happened 18 years ago doesn't mean that a similar situation, that it means the same thing. And I'm going to explain to you why. Back when I was 20, and in that moment, I thought the love of my life. At that stage, I wanted to have children. So I saw him as the dad and the father of my potentially children. And I was thinking, this is endgame for me. That's how I looked at him. That's the pressure that I also put on that relationship, call it pressure. And that time didn't feel like pressure, but just love. And then I got called by someone who claimed to be his girlfriend. And, I don't want to go into a lot of details here, but he got on his knees crying, said it wasn't true. I believed him. We continued the relationship. But with this newfound awareness, I opened up my eyes and suddenly I was seeing all these things that weren't right. And he denied, lied. And this gone on for, a couple of weeks or a couple of months until then, because and this was another woman, like imagine there were a lot of them. And then at one point, I was like, okay, maybe he's right, maybe he's not. So I'm going to write her, 21, an email and I'm going to invite him to a so called party that I'm giving. And if he turns to be right, she's going to show up and be all happy. If he's wrong and they are indeed in some form of a relationship, I will hear it. Unfortunately, I was right. And, the whole relationship blew into pieces. And he knew he couldn't keep me because, I would never, ever forgive him. So we broke up and he then sort of chose her and continued to be in her relationship. And then I was the villain and the liar and all the things. So at that time, like, thinking about it still, like, it's hard. It was so hard. And I was heartbroken. But in the months and the years that followed, the narrative was always and constantly, what an asshole, what a jerk. How could he have done it to me? He's a liar. He this, he that. So it was always like outer focused. And I was a victim. A victim. And I moved through life like a victim. Up until that moment that my business failed, and this is also the short story that you hear in the introduction, up until that moment, and that was when it's almost like I don't know how you call it, when you have glasses and they drop off your your eye shells, like whatever, like that big eureka moment, and you just you wake the fuck up, and you realize, like, who did I get it wrong? Because here's the true story. Once I get into, taking radical responsibility for where I was. And I had to review that narrative. And I had to review that story that I was telling myself. Feeling like a victim. Because one thing is true. When you move through life in the energy of victim, only two things can occur. You will attract people that either will want to rescue you, or you will continue down the path of attracting what I call prosecutors, like how you call, like, villains, because that will keep you in the state of a victim. Because in both cases, either someone wants to help you, save you, or a prosecutor. I think you know what I mean. Someone who keeps doing bad. Both of them means that I don't have my power, and I gave my power away. Because I am powerless. So I need other people to either save me or do me more harm, because I am not standing tall. I am not standing tall. Okay, that's a whole different journey or story. So when I started to take radical responsibility and I had to review the story that I had been telling myself, here's the new narrative or my new truth. Growing up the way I did, I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel loved. I'm not saying that this is the truth. That's how I felt back then. My parents loved me. But I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel loved. And I just really desperately was seeking validation and just someone who could hold me. Up until that moment, 19, 20 years, I wasn't in a serious relationship. And I was desperate. And then there was this guy that at that time I found wildly attractive, who I thought had it all figured out, who was a little bit older than me. And if I would attract him now, this version of me as we speak, I wouldn't even have given him my phone number. Like, I wouldn't have given him the light of day, right? But in that moment, I was like in awe. And I was like, oh, that person is giving me attention. Like that person, that he could love me, So that already said about my self value, where I saw myself. So there was this hierarchy where I was looking up to him and I put him on a pedestal where I should have been. When we put ourselves on this throne, on this pedestal, that's a whole different angle perspective to the world. Like I'm the catch. But I was like, whoa, looking up to him. And there were all these signs and all these, hey, you get what you tolerate. So what I was tolerating is that he wasn't treating me right. He wasn't treating me like a princess. He wasn't treating me like a queen. He wasn't having respect for me. But, and this is the shadow side of the maiden, if you know Carl Jung's seven defined feminine archetypes, which I probably will share more on different episodes or masterclasses. But this was the shadow of the maiden, where we project what we want to see. So we project the image, the ideal, the heavenly, where the happily ever after, because I wanted it so bad. So I looked the other way. So by the time, that I was cheating on, or that he cheated, and by the time that I got called and I refused to listen and I refused to see, like, who is that actually to blame, right? He was who he was in the first place. He was just being him. It was me that wanted him to be something different, that kept him around, because potentially one day, someday. And doesn't that sound familiar? That is what we could do, have done in our businesses. Because, okay, now it doesn't feel right, but someday, like now, I need to work hard. Like now I'm under pressure, but someday. But what if the only thing that matters is now? That the only moment we have is now. Like now is the only moment that we create our future. And law of attraction, like attracts like energy, is that from the energy of stress, from the energy of feeling disempowered, from the energy of anxiety, only more of that comes. So I had to take full on ownership, like, okay, he was way under my league from the first place. From the moment we met, like it was me that had to take off, my blindfolds. So this is the lesson here as well, is that no one situation is the same. And if no one would be watching, what would you do? Like, that's my mantra. Because I am still with my partner. Like I'm still with Jordi. And I'm so happy that we came out the other side, because in a way, maybe walking away would have been easier because you don't have to deal with the real shit. But let's say that you put 10 women next to each other and all their partners cheated. Like, for one, it could have been like, you're not being treated fair. You're not being treated as a queen. This is your cue to walk away, to be in your power. But it could be that the fear, like, but if I leave my business, if I leave my relationship, what would other people think of me? And therefore you stay out of fear. Never a good idea. But the other side could be true as well. Another one is, okay, but my heart says there is a lot of work here to do. There's a lot of love. There's enough. But then there's fear, but I can't stay because what will people think of me? So when we then move into our bodies, get out of our heads, and we just go and move into our hearts, that sometimes our businesses are inviting us to let go of certain services, of certain products, maybe the business as a whole, maybe a podcast, like whatever it is. What would you do if no one would be watching? If you would have and adopt this fuck it mentality, like if everything you would do would be right, what would you do? Because the things and the shadows that I have been observing, that I've been hit by like a wall, like those have been the hardest things to deal with. And in that moment, going through, and the first couple of weeks, definitely I was like, I don't know if this will have a future. But that's also my head needing it to be over, because that's what we are supposed to do, like the pressure of the society and what we think and believe is right or wrong. And there's a lot of judgment on that as well. That's how we move through life in a lot of layers on a different, like if you look at life and all his. But life is to be lived. And I say it again, this, I feel now so grateful that it happened because it broke me wide open, and I needed to be faced with my own demons. And like I said before, is that life is between you and you. And I just came to the very hard conclusion that I was judging my relationship, my partner, for a lot of things that were mirroring my own wounds. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples so you know what I mean. One of the things that I kept hearing myself say is that, because we're in a bad place for months, and I literally wanted to leave the relationship also like for months because I wasn't happy. That's what I thought. But actually, I wasn't happy with him or with the relationship. I wasn't happy with myself. I needed to deal with my shit. And like, look, we co-created this relationship, so we both have the shit that we needed to deal with. And I'm obviously not going into his side of the story because that's his story to tell, but I am taking ownership of my part. And my part is that, there was this part of me that found that he was selfish. And I told him that more than once because I was thinking, like, you are only thinking about yourself. And shall I tell you, the real truth is that I wasn't thinking about me. And this is what we are taught to believe, right? In a relationship, like we have this woman and we have this man, or, whoever it is, like man, woman, I don't care. Everything is welcome and good and happy. But these two humans, and then we hope and expect that the other person is making the other happy. But what I came to believe is that what I said before in this previous episode, like no one is coming to save you. So for me to expect him to think less of himself and more of me, that means that his energy would be like outsourced, putting himself last. That's what I sort of would expecting because that's what I was doing. I was like, yes, but I'm putting myself last. Hello, people pleaser. But it's the contrary. Can you put yourself first? Can you be very clear and get very clear and make it your life's mission, because we evolve and we move through and it changes? Who are you right in this moment? Because you're not the same as you were a year ago. So if you keep and maintain the same routines and the same desires and the same things as you did, you're missing the mark. You first. So who are you being now? What do you need? What do you want from this new place? And you shed the layers, and it doesn't matter what you thought you needed a year ago, but what do you need right now? Because sometimes I notice that in a week, in a month, that changes. Sometimes I think that I know what I need. But my head said something totally different than my heart. Like even this weekend, I was like, oh, I'm so tired. I need to sleep. But my heart was like, no, go to a festival and go dancing. And my head like, how? I'm so tired. Like, go. And I went, and it was great. I felt great. It was exactly what I needed. And that takes practice, right? Because it's not always that simple. But who am I? What do I need and what do I want? And for me to find him selfish because actually I was putting myself last. That was my subconscious desire, my hidden desire, that I needed to start putting myself first because I wasn't living for myself. And what I needed to take back, and what I am taking back, and I'm in the middle of that chapter, is take back my individuality, because my I became a we. And maybe this is something that and whether that's blending in your relationship, could be your kid, Could be your relationship where it's always, or business, I mean, sorry, or your business, but something is always, but it's I first. So my individuality, it is something else than what the business needs or what the relationship needs or what the kids need or even what the friends or what the family needs. No, it's I. And everything that I was doing was about we. Like we had a shared email address, we had shared acquaintances, we had shared, like I adapted and I adjusted like many of my ancestors. And that was my fault. And with that, I started to carry that resentment. And there was something else, like there's a lot of parts of this story, but when I was going to Bali as well, like one of the underlying frustrations that I had as well is that all my holidays with Jordi were always so expensive, right? And I was like, what? When I'm going on my own, it's always so cheap and da da da. How can it be so expensive? And this was not the narrative that I told him, but it was a narrative in my head, and it just built up frustration. Like one, I wasn't holding my ground, so I wasn't really knowing or being clear about what it is that I wanted. So I let him lead me, and then I got frustrated about how he was leading me. Okay, that's detrimental. So I needed to be clear about what I want and the direction I want. But more importantly, and this was to me mind blowing, is that what I actually, that frustration that I was built, and with that judgment, like why is our holiday together always so expensive, is because together we would go to fine dine restaurants. Like together we would sleep in 5-star hotels. And what I realized in Bali, I was like, interesting. And here comes the we again. Interesting because I love those things. But I realized in Bali that without him, apparently, it's hard for me to allow that for myself. So I cannot give it to myself on my own. I need him to give that to myself. And that was so hard to realize. And with that, I realized, that in the first couple of years of our relationship, he gave me like a lot of gifts. Like he was so generous and through his eyes. And I remember saying that I started to love myself through his eyes. And I may have said this already, but now it was the time that can I love myself, enough? So can I put myself first? Like, can you start to put yourself first? That whatever is you desire, can you give that to yourself? And it's been so interesting, and this is another topic of money, which I want to do like a whole separate episode on in the next couple of weeks. But with that, I made myself a promise in Bali. I was like, okay, right, I'm going to do at least one night where I'm going to indulge myself and give myself the thing that brings me the most joy. And in that moment, that was also like sleeping in a 5-star hotel just for a night. Shall I tell you how difficult that was? So the first week I was on my own. And I had all these reasons not to do that. And then I was like, okay, my dad is coming over. Okay, great, we can do that together. And then afterwards, I was like, oh, I'm doing it again. I'm making someone else responsible for my own happiness because apparently it's hard for me to give that on my own to myself. So I need someone else. So that means that when my dad is not there, or in this case with my partner, when he wasn't there. So when I wasn't fulfilling my own needs through someone else, there was this, I wouldn't say loneliness, but definitely I needed, the eyes to feel seen and heard and just loved and appreciated because clearly I couldn't give that to myself. So the end of the day, I actually did do it on my own. But the funny thing is, and that's the layers about money as well, is that I invested so hard, so much in my business, like 10K in a coach for 3 months, like even hiring a podcast manager, like all these courses. But apart from the podcast manager, because that came from a totally different energy, but all the courses, that came from the energy of I'm not enough. So therefore, I validated and no problem, I could invest in my business. And I was thinking like, look, I'm so good because I'm investing it all in myself. But that's the energy of fear. Like, and that's, and there's a lot of bad marketing, that's focusing on our shadows that are made to disempower, for us to feel weak. But the opposite is true, and that's my life mission, is empowering women. Because you are whole. Let no one tell you otherwise. Like, you are not broken. Like, yeah, sure, you're on your healing journey, but it doesn't mean that you're broken. Like, right, this version of you, right, this moment is perfect as you are. And that takes a huge amount of self acceptance and self love. That this is a journey, we can go on a marathon, we can be on a sprint. It is a long journey. And we will be developing and going through this evolution of growth and healing our entire lifetime. There is no end station. Abraham Hicks, Law of Attraction, says this: be happy where you are, but eager for more. That's a whole different energy. So where maybe you notice, or it sounds familiar as well, where you constantly, all your money is pouring into your business because you're like, because I want to grow and I want to be successful. And this has been my experiment. Like, okay, can I then stop investing in my business, and can I invest it in joy without it having to have a purpose? Just for the joy of it. So I spent 300 euros on a hotel night on my own in Bali. Hard to spend that on my own. And it's just the craziest thing. So here's the invitation. Like, when is the last time that you did something for yourself that brought you joy, for no other reason than that? Because it lifts your spirits, because you feel like a queen. Whether that is beautiful high heels, a beautiful dress, like on a weekend away, like whatever that is for you. When is the last time you did something for yourself just out of joy? So, sharing all these stories, I was confronted with myself and realizing that I did a lot of harm to my relationship that I had to take ownership for. And realizing that he wasn't to blame, partly yes. But I had a big part to play here as well. So, another thing as well that I was blaming him for is that I always told him, like, you're so difficult. You're so difficult. In Bali, I realized like how hard it is, especially spending time with my dad, right? A stranger to me. 9 days, which felt very intense, but very good, because we got to know each other in a way that we would never had, the occasional lunch or dinner or FaceTime or whatever. And we had to move through. And I realized, like, just why is it so hard to claim space? There was this moment that I wanted to shop, and he was like, oh, great, I'm coming with you. And I was like, ooh, I want to do that on my own pace. I'm like, tick, tick, tick. I want to go into the shop. Like, I like this. And I try it on and I don't like it. And I want to move on. I want to do that at my own pace. And it was so hard to tell him, like, no, I would prefer to do it on my own. Like, how? And even, being in that hotel that one night, like spending from 0 to 100, 9 days together, and then telling him like that. I wasn't saying that at that time, but like, I would love some space. So I decided that I'm going to a different hotel for a night. And I just felt like that people pleaser in me. Like I was letting him down. How is that letting someone down? And we had such a beautiful conversation around that, because at the start it hurt his feelings. Why do you want to be away from us, right? So it triggers. So sometimes it's so important to be true to who we are, because naturally it may or may not trigger someone, but if it does, there's a purpose to that. And when you can move through that as grown-ups, as adults, and talk about the triggers without being reactive, and also if someone is being reactive, if you can zoom out and see it for what it is, not take it personal, you will start to dance to a whole different rhythm. Instead of these old fights with I had constantly with Jordi, someone needed to be right, someone needed to win, but therefore someone else would lose. So the narrative that I found them very difficult, there was this hidden desire. I wish I could be more like you. Because I was staying in this hotel that my dad booked. And he asked me actually, what would you like? And I was like, fine, you take care of it. And I was in this hotel and I was just wasn't liking it. I wasn't liking the vibe. And I thought of Jordi and I was like, it's so funny because if this was him, he would have left the hotel because it was like, no, I don't like it. And I would then describe him as difficult. Like, why are you being so difficult? Like, why can't you just accept for what it is? But except for what it is, sometimes you tolerate something that's lower than your standards. And sure, there's an element of being polite, but there's also an element of can you give yourself what you love? What brings you the most joy? And sometimes that's also like very politely say, I don't like this. Can we go to a different hotel? Did I tell my dad that? No, we stayed for an extra night. I'm still a work in progress, but at least I'm witnessing it. So, the wish I could be more like you is that can I be open and very speak about my truth? Speak about what I desire. And we actually had a conversation about this the other week because we just came back from Portugal together. And we were talking about what we feel is changed and different. And like it just feels like a whole different relationship, to be honest. And it's too much to go into this in this episode. But just also how much I changed in the process. And one of the things also is that I said to him, like, what I noticed, and it's so funny because I a lot of times, and this has been so hard the first couple of weeks because it's almost like when you change and evolve, and maybe you notice, but it's almost like you have this new version that you are, but also at the same time, you're hand in hand with this old version. So you can observe this old part of you that sometimes it's activated and sometimes you see this new you coming forth, but then you still can imagine how your old self was reacting and you're like, holy fuck, like it's a bit of a mind bender. So I still witnessing the old parts, but and that moment also realizing like I cannot believe that it has not always been this way because how can it have not? Because this is so logic. Like, how can you not have clarity about what it is you want? Because now I'm like, okay, I feel like eating fish tonight. Like, no, I want to go to bed now. Like, I'm very straightforward and very clear about what it is I want. But apparently, before I wasn't. And then I was carrying this resentment. Like, and if because he was so strong willed, I was like, you know what? I don't want to have this fight. You do whatever you want, and then I follow. But now talking about with Jordi, that's also not very sexy. It's not very like inspirational that someone just follows without being clear about what it is you actually want moment by moment. So with that being difficult, it's just what I realized that before, and this is our society as well, the good girl syndrome, is that we celebrated being easy. Like the amount of times I celebrated myself for being so flexible. Sure, I move along with whatever you want. So in that, I adjusted, but how is that positive? So shouldn't we celebrate ourselves for being difficult? For having high standards, for being strong willed, for being very selective into who we gather around us, for where we spend our energy, for the conversations we held, for the people, for our partners, for the type of relationship. So let's be difficult. So I want to end, this podcast episode with one last stories about claiming space, and with that also the accepting for who we are. Doing our own inner work, accepting who we are, including our flaws, because it's not always happy and bright and rainbow and sunshine. Sometimes it's not that, but it's equally important. And the acceptance also of the people around us, that we stop fighting against them, but then either realize you're not for me, or we take them as they are. And I had such a transcending moment with my dad when I was in Bali. And it's just to show also our triggers and how important it is, one, to cater to them, but also like, again, this moment of old self, new self, all being there, all present. Because he asked me, like, what do you want to do with your business? And I responded, dream big. I said to him what I was doing, having freelancing, releasing my podcast, and having online programs, etc., etc. And I was just sharing the vision, and my vision is big. So for him, he got a bit cautious. And he got like, ooh, I don't know if that's such a smart move. And what if this happens? And what if that happens? And in that moment, I could observe my old self being activated and realizing that my old self would have moved in needing to defend herself, the overachiever. But instead, I laid back and instead I let him talk, and I realized that, okay, he's just concerned. Can I just see him for that concern and move with that concern? So I said to him, like, yeah, sure, like, I understand. And I just let him be. But at the same time, like, it was felt like this multi-dimensional moment, because at the same time I was like, wowzers, my old self as well, realizing then in that moment, realizing like, what he is projecting is his own fear. When someone is maybe less courageous or doesn't dream as big, or, whatever the reason is, someone holds back, that's how someone will project. Then it's us in that projection that we oftentimes take it very personal. And when do we take it very personal? When we feel insecure, when we feel vulnerable, because then it's triggering. But that's our responsibility to to feel strong and empowered around our decisions. And even if we don't feel strong and empowered, that we are okay with that. So before, that used to be like something that felt very vulnerable, someone that would question, that's how it would feel to me, that I was or wasn't good enough. And I would react and I would respond. And then such a very simple conversation will turn out in an argument. And this old self also started to see new self observing the old self, that my old self would have then held a mirror and would have confronted someone with their wounds. But that would have actually be a distraction from my own pain. So rather than to deal with my own insecurity and therefore my own trigger, what I felt with questioning me, questioning my vision, questioning my dreams, I would then tell him, yes, but this is about you, because you this and you that. And I would actually also think that I was doing someone a favor. And this is what I was doing in my relationship as well. And there's this tendency of us women to over communicate, and that we would share what we call, quote unquote, our truth, because we think that we are actually helping someone, that that's actually love. But what it actually is, fear. Either it's the fear that someone is not moving fast enough, it's the fear that, the distraction, like I said, the fear to deal with our own wounds, the actual fear that maybe my dream won't come true, that maybe I don't have what it takes, that maybe I'm not good enough. And in my relationship, to be honest, like, it's these kind of things that I am witnessing almost on the daily. Like even this weekend at a festival, I was like, oh my Lord, I see this old version of me standing next to me and just putting so much pressure on this relationship on you because I needed my wounds to be filled, because I wasn't feeling good enough, because I wasn't feeling loved by myself. So that feels like a nice ending to this conversation. And, this is the work. This is the work that, I'm inviting you to move through, that with every situation to move through with an open heart, and that everything in our lives is not against us, it's for us. So it's a different narrative now that I get to say I am happy. Happy not being the right word, but I'm grateful for the situation as it encountered, because I had to face off with a lot of parts of myself where now, I just feel so much more at ease and focusing. Like next Thursday, I'm going to Portugal on my own again. So this is the season, the Queen era, where I get to put myself first. But I thought that I was already doing that. When I was being online, I haven't been online in a year, talking about that Queen energy, so this is the blind spot. So, that's also and I'm going to talk about that in the next episode as well. Everything that I took out of psychic school, and also the discernment of who we let in, teachers, gurus, like, and avoid putting people on a pedestal, because we never know what people are moving through, and the reality or the acceptance that you know your truth better than anyone. You know your desires better than anyone. You know the path you need to be taking better than anyone. So, if anything, what I'm here to do is to activate, help you remember your power, to realize that you are autonomous, that you get to decide, and only you, what's right for you, even though that no one in the world may understand, and that you hold the power. And what it takes, or what's important, is to get out of your head and in touch with your heart, with your body, and learn to hear the silent whispers of your intuition, of your higher self, of your soul, like however you want to call it, but your inner guidance. Because no one outside of you can tell you what you need to do. You have your own inner compass, your own inner GPS, and that never leaves you astray. And this has been my lesson to learn. And like, yes, sometimes the way it's shown up is hard, but then can we move through it the other side and be grateful for it every single day? And I'm not telling you that I have it all figured out, because I won't. And I will never in this lifetime. And that's what this situation has done to me, it has humbled me to my core. Humbled me that you are standing right next to me. We are doing this together. We are on this journey together. And what we are doing is building this feminine force, this army of heart centered women who are in their feminine, balancing their masculine energy, receptive to the pleasure, to joy, to magic, to everything that life has to offer us. And it's a journey. Thank you so much for being here with me. And I'm wishing you an amazing day.